Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Monday, June the 30th, 2025. As always, I'm going to be talking about the astrology and the I Ching for today, the last day of June, but I also want to look at the UK, and I specifically want to focus on Keir Starmer and what's going on in his horoscope, and also some of the surrounding charts. For example, the chart when he became Prime Minister, and also the chart when he became leader of the Labour Party. And there are real questions about his leadership, and people are now thinking about who his replacement might be. Not a replacement that comes about through an election, but through internal party processes in the Labour Party. And at the moment, I think the number one candidate to take over from him is his deputy, Angela Rayner. And I have looked at her chart before, but I do want to have another look at her chart because she has some interesting solar arc directions coming up. But before I look at the UK, it is the last day of June, and I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for today, June the 30th, 2025. So here is the chart for today, Monday, June the 30th. By the way, if appropriate, feel free to like and subscribe. So at noon today, New York time, we have the moon in Virgo, and the moon is in Virgo all day long, and it's making a conjunction to Mars, and also a conjunction to the South Node. So, with the moon making a conjunction to Mars, that might indicate some tension. Why would there be tension? Because people want things to be right. I mean, the moon is in the moon is in Virgo after all, and so with Virgo, there can be a keen attention to detail, and it's possible to just get annoyed about things. It's not necessarily helpful, but if things aren't perfect, then there could be a sense of irritation. On the other hand, the moon is also making a sextile to the sun, and I do think that moon sextile sun does go a long way towards mitigating that conjunction to Mars. In fact, you might say that moon making a sextile to the sun and making a conjunction to Mars might actually be okay. It might be relatively dynamic. I mean, I say relatively dynamic because the sun is in Cancer. Moon and Mars are in Virgo. So, these are not known to be dynamic signs, but they can make progress. And so if there are things we want to do, last day of the month, we might feel we want to really clear the decks, get ready for July, then we will, I think, have the requisite energy levels. Now, the moon is making a conjunction to the South Node. It's starting to move towards a conjunction of the South Node. Now, that conjunction isn't exact today, but we might still feel it. And it does perhaps say something about the Virgo energy, and we perhaps need to contrast it with the fact that, Pisces is the opposite sign to Virgo. The North Node is in Pisces, and so with the North Node in Pisces, you might say that it's generally a time when we have to take into account the complexities of the world in which we live, that things aren't straightforward, that some things are just ambiguous and up in the air. And if you think about Pisces as a water sign, sometimes we just have to let go and just become part of the ocean. But South Node in Virgo says no. South Node in Virgo, at least compared to North Node in Pisces, wants to hold firm, wants to really know what's going on. And it's always good to know what's going on, but we can take things too far. And so what we mustn't do with the moon starting to make this conjunction to the south node in Virgo is get completely hung up on detail, feel that we need answers, we need to absolutely know what's going on, because that might be difficult, might even be impossible, and I don't think it's going to be entirely useful. Additionally, we have a semi-sextile between Mercury and Jupiter. So Mercury is at 4 degrees Leo, in fact 5 degrees Leo almost, and Jupiter is at around 5 degrees Cancer. So Mercury and Jupiter are 30 degrees apart, and that aspect is not necessarily fortunate. I wouldn't have said it's a bad aspect, but it's an aspect we have to kind of work with. And so, you could say that Mercury is the mind, and it's us perhaps trying to communicate, trying to think things through. And Mercury's in Leo. Mercury can have a high opinion of itself. And Mercury has to take into account Jupiter because of this 30-degree aspect. And it might not be entirely easy. I mean, Jupiter is perhaps asking Mercury to see things in a different way. Jupiter is in Cancer. Jupiter is exalted in Cancer. So that is quite a strong Jupiter. Arguably, it's not such a strong Mercury. And I say not such a strong Mercury because Mercury in Leo is just too single-minded. It's not like Mercury is fallen or in its detriment in Leo, but it can be single-minded, too into itself and its own ideas, and it wants to be right, and then it has to incorporate what Jupiter in Cancer is suggesting. And Jupiter in Cancer is, it's a strong Jupiter, and it's quite a complex Jupiter. It's at least complex compared to Mercury in Leo. So if you have big ideas and you're absolutely sure you're in the right, and you feel you want to express these ideas, then perhaps think again. Consider the possibility that there might be alternative ways of looking at things, maybe even better ways of looking at things. And it's not that you have to ditch all your ideas or keep quiet. You just have to incorporate it, because the semi-sextile can work in your favor. It's not like an opposition, which can be really quite a difficult aspect. But semi-sextile is asking you to take something that doesn't feel right, but you don't necessarily feel comfortable with, because it's slightly challenging, but you can incorporate it into who you are and what you are expressing. And so that's the broad picture. One thing I should say is that Mercury is aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and it's a quick aspect. It doesn't last long, but Mercury, again, it's the way we think. I've just talked about Mercury when it's semi-sextile Jupiter, and because Mercury is aspecting the Mars-Saturn midpoint, we have to watch a couple of things. Firstly, we have to watch what we say. I mean, Mercury is the communication planet. Mars-Saturn can be quite harsh, and so we might say things which aren't always very nice, or we might say things which are maybe depressive. I mean, Mars and Saturn can have a bleak view of the world. It can see things in the worst possible light. Or Mercury on a Mars-Saturn midpoint can want to talk about things that other people don't want to talk about. Bad things, difficult things, tragedy, death. That can be, one aspect of Mars and Saturn. So, do consider the subject matter, and also consider your thoughts. And if you find yourself having negative thoughts, then don't necessarily take them too seriously, because cognition is so important, and whether we have a negative or a positive cognition, can make all the difference. So turning to the picture for Sydney, Australia. So if we set the chart for noon in Sydney, the moon is still in Virgo. So, wherever you are, the moon is in Virgo. If you are in Sydney, Australia, then at noon, that Moon-Mars conjunction is exact. And we also that moon sextile sun is exact. So in a way, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, it's a more intense day. It's more powerful because that moon conjunct Mars is right there, middle of the day at noon, and it's at sextile the sun. So it could be dynamic, and it could allow you to get a lot of things done, more so than if you're in the Americas. So it's really a matter of degree. So perhaps a stronger day, which is sort of clearer cut, and things could go wrong because moon is conjunct Mars, but I do think that you're going to be supported as well by the fact that the moon is making a sextile to the sun, and the moon may actually bring together the sun and the Mars, because the sun and Mars are actually in sextile. So perhaps I've been a bit too negative about that Moon Mars conjunction. Maybe it's actually has the potential for being a real positive. And if you have a clear plan, then I think that you should be able to execute it. And then there is the heliocentric view. So with the sun at the center of the solar system, and the Earth is now really close to the square of Mars. I mean, it's right there. So the Earth is at 9 degrees 7 Capricorn, with Mars at 9 degrees 30 Libra. Now this Mars-Saturn square, this Earth-Mars square is going to be with us for a few more days, but it's probably now at peak, and so we may see action. It is a day that is dynamic, and it supports what we know from the geocentric chart. With the sun is still sextile Mars, the moon is conjunct Mars, and so it's action orientated. But the question is that action going to work for us or against us? Or is it just going to be an angry day? It could be an angry day with Earth square Mars, and then there may be events which catch our attention, though it's no longer part of a T-square. The Earth and Mars are now moving away from Jupiter, and so perhaps it's not quite as powerful as it used to be. So I don't want to over dramatize that aspect. And additionally, we have got Mercury making a sextile to the Earth, and so Mercury sextile Earth may be a time when we can tell people what's on our mind, and if we're annoyed about something, then we can articulate this annoyance with Earth sextile Mercury. So things needn't be so bad. And now I want to look at today from the viewpoint of the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Monday, June the 30th, 2025. I should say there's not a great deal going on, and it's one of those days when I'm thinking that my forecasts for the 12 signs are going to be briefer than usual, not necessarily 5 or 6 minutes, maybe more like 3 or 4 minutes, but, as always, we'll have to see what happens. So anyway, here are my forecasts for the 12 signs. Aries, you do actually have a lot of get up and go. There are things you want to do, there are things you want to accomplish, and provided you are disciplined, I do really think that it can be a very useful day. Though it's not a day when you should be desperate to take the initiative, feel that you have to do something new, but it's really important that you are some kind of leader. You're the one in control. You're forcing the pace. You're the one with new ideas, having wonderful suggestions. No, it's not like that. I think instead, Aries, it's about seeing things through and making sure that everything is in order. And if you don't like the way things are going, then you can make changes. But that doesn't mean to say that you should be initiating brand new projects. So look around you, see what needs to be done, and if you're not happy about something, then make suggestions, force the pace. And many people will appreciate that, because not everyone knows what they want to do. Not everyone has your enthusiasm and even your sense of detail. Now, I know that Aries is not a sign that is usually associated with details. Details are boring. They bring you down. They even grind you to a halt. But today, not just today. I mean, Mars is in Virgo after all, and Mars is your ruler, and it's at the moment the Sun is making a sextile to Mars, Moon is making a conjunction to Mars. At the moment, at least compared to usual, you are more able to deal with details, and perhaps one thing at a time you can start to really sort things out and to make real progress. And so think about perhaps how you would like to make your life more secure, more comfortable. What is annoying you? And if something is annoying you, you can do something about it. And it's not about just getting angry for the sake of it. And while you're at it, don't forget your health. Sometimes Aries does forget their health because you've got better things to do. You want to do something. You want to eat something. You want to maybe take a risk. But at the moment, your health is important, and you can take active steps to improve your health. And I'm not making any concrete suggestions about what you should do. I mean, you have to look at your own life and what you're doing with it. And if you believe that you're doing something that is unhealthy, then you can take the initiative. You can make the decision. Enough. You're going to stop doing it. Or by the same token, you might say that you're going to start doing something which is good for you, whether it's sort of diet or exercise or maybe just a state of mind. And so that's something you can think about. And also, don't forget the environment, the atmosphere. Atmosphere matters, the emotional atmosphere. Some people are good for you, other people not quite so good for you. So you can make decisions, Aries, which I think can make you feel better. And also, Aries, if you're feeling better, if you're feeling good about yourself and you're feeling that you're in control, that means that you can start to tune into who you are and what you can do, because it is a time at the moment when you're getting a clear idea about something that you're actually able to do very well, and you perhaps have a high level of accomplishment in this area, and perhaps you now have a chance to really make the most of it. So don't underestimate yourself, Aries, and make the most of what you've got, and be as healthy as you possibly can, because there is a focus on health today, and there are active steps you can take to make the most of everything. And if something is bad for you or something is undermining you, then now might be a good time to move away from it. Taurus, you're feeling quite good, I think, about yourself. You feel that things are moving, and you're enjoying the fact that Venus is Venus is still in Taurus, though it is true that Venus is starting to move on to the fixed star Algol. And I sort of didn't mention that. Perhaps I should have mentioned it, but I mean, as far as how close Venus is to Algol, I should probably check that, because Algol is a fixed star, which of course has a rather difficult reputation, and so looking at how close it is, Venus is still a degree away from Algol, so it's not quite there yet. And I think that tomorrow we'll be talking more about Venus on Algol. But as Venus starts to approach Algol, certain things might be happening. You might feel that there is a small concern coming in. What could go wrong? And additionally, Venus conjunct Algol can be associated with jealousy. The Moon conjunct Algol can also be linked with it. So it might be that you are at the receiving end of someone else's jealousy. I mean, that is a possibility. But I didn't want to really dwell on that too much, because I think the key point is that Venus is still in Taurus. Venus is in its own sign in Taurus, and also you've got the Moon in Virgo. Moon is in an Earth sign. The Moon will eventually make a trine to Venus. So tomorrow the Moon will be making a trine to Venus. So with this Earth emphasis, I think that you should be feeling good about yourself, and you can start to think about what is possible, and you shouldn't just do something out of duty. You should do things because that is what you want to do, and you have choices, and you shouldn't be chaotic about it, though. I mean, you need to sort of carefully decide what you want to do today, and I think that good planning might be important. Even when you're dealing with something that is supposed to be fun. Now, fun and planning are not two words that you don't normally bring together. But sometimes you do have to plan things out, because if you don't plan things out, then there might be other things going on. There might be competing claims to your time, and what you want to do might be forgotten, and then you have to worry about other people's needs, and you might miss your chance. So if you do want to do something which is an essential part of who you are, is an expression of your joy in life, then make sure that you've got room to do it. And so be clear about it, though don't be entirely precious about your own creativity. The Moon is making a conjunction to the South Node, and the North Node is in because the North Node is in Pisces, the South Node is in Virgo. Moon is in Virgo, South Node is in Virgo. So by all means, amuse yourself, enjoy yourself, be creative, but don't entirely forget the social dimension. And so the challenge here is to, on one hand, make sure that you're not crowded out. Make sure that you don't spend all your time trying to accommodate yourself to other people's needs. But you also have to consider other people and realize that you're not working in a vacuum. And in fact, the right people can help you in terms of getting where you want to be. And when you're looking at other people and relationships in general, some Taurians could have mixed feelings. You can see the potential for getting close to people today, but you're also aware that things could end very quickly, and some Taurans might be thinking about the fragility of relationships and how things can change very quickly. Perhaps how love can switch into hatred, life can switch into death, death can switch into life. It's all very close, and that could be quite intense. Bringing those two principles together, the principles of growth and decay, they seem to be very close, and that is especially the case when it comes to other people. And so you might be with someone, you're talking to someone, you might feel very close to someone, but at the same time you're thinking, how long is this relationship going to last for? Is it going to last forever, or is it going to finish in 5 minutes' time? And so there might be a rather sort of dramatic feeling to today, when it comes to other people, and almost a feeling of tragedy. I'm not saying there is going to be tragedy. I'm talking about your subjective perceptions of other people. But it could be that I'm overcomplicating things. But we also shouldn't forget that Venus is starting to move towards Algol, that fixed star, and I think that it's exactly conjunct Algol tomorrow. But I'm not trying to scare you or anything. The basic message today, Taurus, is that things are great, and you can do largely what you want, and you can get a great deal of pleasure out of what you do. And you can also get a great deal of pleasure being with the right people. But there is just this sort of intensity in the background which perhaps you want to consider. Gemini, it's a day when some of your thoughts are, going in strange places. And, I'm a Gemini, of course. And, when I was looking at the comments, actually, someone suggested I was depressed when I did my reading for the week as a whole. Because at the weekend, I do this reading where I just cover, the whole week ahead. And someone suggested I was depressed. I didn't actually feel depressed, not at all. But who knows, maybe I was depressed at an unconscious level. And, talking about depression and negativity, at the moment, some Geminis may have a negative view of the world. And they might be looking at how things could go wrong, and that's what Geminis do sometimes. Geminis can reduce things to their component parts and reduce life to saying, well, what is the point? That is a Gemini trait, and it can be a Gemini trait. And of course, we shouldn't forget that Jean-Paul Sartre of existentialism fame was a Gemini, and he sort of comes to a conclusion that life is absurd and perhaps meaningless, but we somehow have to create meaning out of the absurdity of life. And at the moment, some Geminis are feeling that things are difficult, even if things are not difficult. Was perhaps Geminis are focusing on the negative. We can see how things can go wrong, and it's not necessarily about our lives. It might be about what's happening all around us. And when we look at what's happening all around us, it doesn't look good, and we can perhaps see how things are moving from bad to worse. And we might not even mind. There may be a sense with Geminis that they're actually enjoying the negative, almost reveling in it. Geminis can do that. And this might say something about what you want to talk about today. What are you talking about? You might want to talk about things that are sort of negative, graves and worms and epitaphs. Didn't sort of Richard II say that? that might be how Geminis are feeling, and talking about things that are negative and are grim and are reminders of the inevitability of death can actually make Geminis feel good about themselves, particularly if they are getting a reaction. And on a plus side, Geminis at the moment can be very, very realistic. Sometimes realism is needed. Other people have their fantasies, and they think everything's going to be fine, but Gemini can bring people down to earth. Okay, Gemini is not always very grounded, but right now, I think that Geminis are grounded. They can see because they can see what can go wrong, and you can, in that way, give good advice, but maybe your advice won't be acceptable because it's just a bit too realistic, a bit too grim. But the important point, Gemini, is that you don't get caught up in your own negativity. You can play games with your negativity, but you don't want to reach a stage where you're telling yourself that everything is hopeless, because it's not hopeless. This is a game, or it should be seen as a game. And what I'm talking about, this passing negativity, it is passing. It won't last. It won't last so much longer. But what can you do? Well, try and enjoy it if you can. Though do consider the impact you're having on other people, and that particularly applies to what you decide you want to talk about. And in other departments, well, at the moment, Geminis are actually quite grounded, as I've already suggested, and many Geminis are going to want to spend more time than usual in their own home, somewhere where they feel safe and secure. Perhaps too much time at home. There is a conjunction between the Moon and the South Node coming up, and this Moon-South Node conjunction might encourage you, Gemini, to just stay where you are and just completely concentrate on what you know and trust, and perhaps ignore other opportunities. And this would particularly be the case if you've got ambitions, or you have a job, or you're looking for a job. There are opportunities out there, but you don't want your own negativity or your own sort of inward lookingness to spoil that. And finally, there's relationships, and there is a semi-sextile between Mercury and Jupiter today. And Mercury is, of course, your ruling planet, and with this semi-sextile to Jupiter, it might indicate that you and another person have a slight mismatch. You're looking at things in different ways, and it could be that you are too sure that you're in the right, and ideally you should be making a special effort to accommodate another person's view, or just another person's way of being, and perhaps accommodate the fact that there is another person who is maybe more emotional than you, more sensitive than you, and it's not that they're weaker than you. It's not that their approach is the wrong approach. In fact, it's absolutely possible that the other person is in a stronger position than you, and they've got answers that you don't have. And so do consider the possibility, Gemini, that you can learn from another person, and that means that you might need to have a certain amount of humility. Cancer, I think things look good. You are able to look after yourself, and we have a sextile between the Moon and the Sun, and also we have a conjunction between the Moon and the Mars, and I think that configuration really should help you, should allow you to project who you are. You don't forget, Cancer, the Sun is moving through your sign, and it's sort of still, Sun is still in the first decan, the first third of Cancer, and it's just made a sextile to Mars. The Moon is bringing that sextile together again. So Moon, as I said, making a sextile to the Sun, making a conjunction to Mars. That does allow you, Cancer, to be pretty dynamic, and you're able to be yourself, and there should be no problems making an impression. I think that people will listen to you, and of course, in order to be listened to, you need to have something to say. You don't have to go on and on, but what is your message? What would you like people to understand? And because now is a good time to get it out into the open. People will listen. Now, Cancer, don't think that you have got all of the answers. You might find that when you're talking, you get feedback, and you perhaps realize that in some respects you've looked at things sort of in a way that is maybe a little too down to earth, and you've perhaps not fully understood the broader picture, and also the interconnectedness of everything. And that's not really a criticism, it's just suggesting that you could go further. And so if you are talking about stuff, thinking about things, or writing about things, just don't assume that you've got all of the answers, and that you should be prepared to just take things a bit further, perhaps listen to alternative views, or just work with your ideas a bit more. But overall, Cancer, I think it's a day when you really can be forceful. The Moon is making a conjunction to Mars, and that conjunction with Mars is problematic for some people, but I don't think it's problematic for you. I think it gives you the power you need to really get people to understand what you are about. And so don't be afraid of being forceful, showing some anger, but not too much anger. I don't think you need to be angry. Okay, you might be contradicted. You might feel that some people are a bit sluggish and need to be motivated. But that is something that you very, very much can do. Yeah, you can be a motivator. And if you want results, if you want to make an impression, if you want to go somewhere, if you want to go to lots of different places today, then that might be something you want to do. Your presence, your company might make the difference, and people want to see you. Though with Moon conjunct Mars, don't spend all day driving, for example, because with Moon conjunct Mars, short distance traveling, you can have too much of a good thing there, and it could be quite annoying. And do try to anticipate the traffic conditions, because there's something about travel, again, especially short-term travel, that could be annoying. And you certainly don't want to be in a situation where you are just traveling for the sake of it, or because you're used to traveling, or because you feel that you should be traveling. Do think about why you're traveling, and not just do it for the sake of it. And you can go to different places and meet up with different people, and at the same time not have to go miles and miles out of your way. Leo, today you possibly feel that there are things you need to safeguard, and you might be quite protective of your own interests. Who else is going to look after your own interests? Well, it's got to be you, hasn't it? And so if you think about what you have, what you own, what might be owed to you, And if you think about money, in other words, then that might not be such a bad thing to do. But of course, you don't want to be obsessive about it. It's true that there is a conjunction between the Moon and Mars in Virgo, and with that conjunction, it's possible that money matters take up a lot of your time. They could be really irritating as well. And in fact, once you start thinking about money, it may actually be difficult to stop, and you could just go on and not really make much progress. So do think about why you're doing what you're doing, and if you feel that you want to get hold of something, work out what the minimum steps are and just go and do it. And don't make it a matter of life and death. And there are many ways of making money, improving your financial situation, and it is one of those times when potentially you can benefit from other people's concerns and worries. So if you're in a situation where you have something to offer, offering someone help, comfort, reassurance, that is a situation where it can work for you. And you might feel guilty about that, but it depends what you do, doesn't it? But where there is a misfortune, where there is a problem, there is also a benefit. And to put it crudely, you could benefit from someone else's misfortune, and I don't think it's anything to feel guilty about. And it's just sometimes happens. And additionally, in terms of your interests, you might be looking at something which seems broken down, dilapidated, decayed, unpopular, and you look at it and you may be able to see the benefits there. You may be able to see the advantages. So don't just ignore something because it doesn't look like it's in good shape, or even because it has a bad reputation. Because there are many ways in which you can benefit from things which other people won't touch with a barge pole. Now, that does mean, Leo, that you have to exercise some caution. Some things you really shouldn't touch with a barge pole, but gain can come in many forms, and you shouldn't just ignore something just because it's unusual. And additionally, be imaginative and listen to your dreams if you can. Maybe there's a dream that's sort of in the background. You had a dream, you can't remember it all, but something was there and it's challenging you, and it's asking you to change the way you think. That does sometimes happen with dreams. Something has been building up and you haven't really consciously recognized it, and then you have a dream and it's really telling you that, well, now is the time. Now is the time to incorporate something, or to recognize something as being true, as being an integral part of your life. So don't ignore your dreams. Don't ignore your fantasies, your daydreams. Something is trying to come in and trying to make itself felt, and it's all about integration. So overall, Leo, you could say that it's a complicated day, but I don't think it need be a bad day, and you may be able to benefit from the strangest of things. Virgo, there is continued emphasis on your sign. I mean, Mars, of course, is in Virgo, and the Moon is now in Virgo, and of course we've got the South Node in Virgo as well, and so you feel that there are things you can do, and now might be your time, but you must make sure that you do the right thing. And just because you want to do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should do it straight away in the original form that you had imagined. And with the South Node in Virgo, there's some possibility that you are maybe selfish, or you put your own interests first, or your own perceptions first. So you may have an idea about how something should be done, and you might immediately think that this idea is the idea to go for. But there may be alternative approaches. Additionally, you shouldn't think that the simple solution is the only solution, and you perhaps need to listen to your feelings. Your feelings are telling you something else, but you perhaps want things to be nice and straightforward. But that doesn't mean to say that they are going to be straightforward. And if there are people around you, try to understand what they're trying to say, what they're trying to communicate. They might have a view that you could really benefit from listening to. But I don't want to take away from the fact that it should be a great day. When you will have a great deal of energy. I mean, after all, the moon is making a conjunction to Mars. The moon is making a sextile to the sun, and it's a time when you can be very sociable, and people are going to, in most cases, like you, provided you make some effort to accommodate yourself to whatever the situation is, and you don't want to fall into the trap of being too critical and too negative. You could be. Virgos can be sharp, and they can say things that not everyone appreciates. And additionally, you might want to focus on the negative, on what could go wrong, and that's not what other people want to hear. Now, it's always good to be realistic, but you don't want to be too realistic. And you have to be careful what you talk about, because some Virgos might be tempted to talk about things that people really don't want to hear. And maybe you should keep those thoughts to yourself. And certainly in a public sense, you should try to look at things in the best possible light without being completely over-optimistic. I mean, you're not really over-optimistic at the moment, but there's pressure to be over-optimistic. That's what people want to hear. And you might have your private doubts about something. So if you do have private doubts about something, then there is this question about how do you express that? And you have to be optimistic, but you have to show that Virgoan realism, and that Virgoan realism needs to be expressed in a very positive and constructive way. So it could be difficult to get that balance right, but I think you should try. And perhaps it's all about really understanding, what other people can deal with, what other people can tolerate. That assumes, of course, that you are in a situation where you have to deal with other people. Of course, if you don't have to deal with other people, if you're having a day when you're on your own, then, well, you can certainly do lots of stuff. I think you're going to have a very constructive attitude, but you need to keep busy if you're on your own, and you need to be doing stuff. What you don't want is to spend too much time thinking, because if you spend all day thinking, then those thoughts might move into areas which aren't necessarily very constructive. Libra, there's probably not a great deal that has to be done. I know it's a Monday, beginning of a week, so you might feel pressure, but I don't think that's it's a kind of pressure that you have to give into. And so, Libra, if you want to do things your way, if you want to do nothing at all, then yeah, that's probably okay. And there are things you can probably do on your own, which yeah, don't need anyone's help. You do feel the pressure, you know there is pressure, but yeah, I just don't think that pressure, is crucial. And it's possible, Libra, that if you've got ambitions, that the best way to expand these ambitions, to really make these ambitions happen, is to work things out, on your own, in your own way, because other people may not always be helpful, and you do have your own insights, and these insights are, they're quite personal, and you need time to work things out on your own. And if you were to listen too hard to other people, well, you might really get nowhere. And indeed, when dealing with other people, if you do have to deal with other people, it might be a rather strange experience. At some level, you are a Libran, you like other people, you like having other people around you, but today, if you spend too much time with any one person, you might start to feel sort of uneasy, and you might be wondering, where this is all going. And people who seem attractive at one level, when you get close to them, you can see another side to their personality, and you can see the problems in people. It's really quite easy to see it, and you're kind of rather conflicted here, because you realize that some things are impermanent and moods are impermanent, and just because someone is being nice to you today doesn't mean to say they'll be nice to you tomorrow. And so relationships of all kinds, it could be complicated and perhaps rather perplexing. And you shouldn't forget also that Venus is starting to move towards Algol. Algol is that rather difficult fixed star associated with unpleasantness, accidents, disasters, and everything else. And so it's because of that, maybe that's a reason, Libra, why you might be feeling wary, and also why it might be a good idea to sort of keep your own counsel and not feel that you have to worry too much about other people's opinions. And so, Libra, it does actually strike me as maybe being quite a complicated day, and other people could be complicated. They might not seem complicated, but they could become complicated. And maybe you need to just sort of wait it out, and at the same time not over dramatize things. So what you mustn't do, Libra, is to get caught up in fantasies and fear which really has no basis. If possible, you should just try to make things as simple as possible, and if you can make things simple, then I think that things should be okay. Scorpio, it's quite an active day, I think. The moon is making a conjunction to Mars, and so with the moon making a conjunction to Mars, and the moon is also making a sextile to the sun, that seems to me that you can be pretty active all day long, and don't forget other people. Other people are there, and if you want to introduce yourself, if you want to meet up with people, then I think that should work relatively well. But don't get completely caught up in your social life. I don't think you will. Scorpios do know that other people have their limits, and with the moon starting to make a conjunction to the south node, it's possible today and tomorrow that maybe you're tempted to spend too much time worrying about other people and their needs and giving into the kind of pressure that they're applying on you. That is possible. So to balance that, Scorpio, it's important to think about yourself and what you would like to do, and how you can do something of lasting value, which is a fundamental expression of who you are. And at the moment, Scorpio, you're a clever person, and you have got particular specializations, and those specializations are becoming clear, and they're becoming an integral part of who you are. And perhaps they need to be worked through on your own. Maybe you don't need anyone's help. So do get that balance right. Other people do matter, and in your social life you can certainly be dynamic and you can be forceful. In fact, with the moon making a conjunction to Mars, it's possible that you say something which is quite aggressive. You almost surprise yourself, and it might just be about pointing something out. You point something out that maybe people don't want to hear, people are surprised, and you get a reaction, maybe even a negative reaction, but you can handle it. And so perhaps Scorpio, you need to be honest. A bit of honesty doesn't do any harm. And so Scorpio, be in control, and think about yourself, and just make sure that whatever you're good at, and there are plenty of things you're good at, that you give yourself the chance to excel. Sagittarius, you are in a position where you can get noticed. You've got a lot to offer, a lot to contribute, and you believe it's a time when you need to stand out. And if you don't say it, then no one else will. At least that's might be your view. So if you are working today, then I think that you'll be powerful, and your insights will be needed, and you'll just notice things that need to be done, and you won't be entirely relaxed, because there are things you can see, there are connections you can see, and that's what Sagittarians are very good at. They can see how one thing is connected to another. You want to bring it together. Maybe other people aren't going to be interested, but you're the one that's got to push things through. So it's okay to be ambitious, and it's okay to be pushy, but don't overdo it. There is a possibility that you do take things too far. It's good to notice lots of different details and to remind people of these details, but you don't want to get absolutely obsessed with detail. And at some level, you've got to recognize that there's something else going on, and that you've got to sort of look at the deeper picture. And perhaps it's the emotional picture. And it is a time, Sagittarius, don't forget, you've got the Jupiter is moving into Cancer. Jupiter is in Cancer. Jupiter's your ruler. It's in Cancer. It's an emotional sign. So it is a time for understanding your emotions and understanding where your emotions are taking you. But today might be a day when you just kind of forget that, and you just look at how things are on the surface, but you forget the deeper picture. And if that were to happen, then that might cause some concern, and other people might regard you as being insensitive. I mean, there's no need to be insensitive at the moment, but if you're careless, then you might come over as being not careful, but callous, and just dismissive of another person's concern because it doesn't make any logical sense to you. So if you can be sensitive, Sagittarius, then the day should be fine. And it is a day, like yesterday, like the weekend, when you really can be quite forceful, and if you want something done, you can make it happen. And so don't worry about power. Don't feel that there's any possibility that you might lose control of the situation, because you won't. And as far as relationships are concerned, there is a semi-sextile between Mercury and Jupiter. Jupiter is, of course, your ruler, and Mercury is a planet that very often is relevant to Sagittarius's relationships. And so when you've got Mercury semi-sextile Jupiter, that might indicate that you and another person are kind of at cross purposes. You seem to be at cross purposes. You don't seem to be on the same wavelength, but you have a similarity, but also you're aware of a passing incompatibility. So what's it actually about? And it may be that someone is saying something, articulating something that you don't like the sound of, and it's threatening. It might be challenging. And if you hear someone saying something confidently, then don't just reject them. Don't think that that they're arrogant, they're ill-informed. Listen to what they've got to say, and do take into account other people's egos. People do have strong egos, and there's nothing wrong with having a strong ego. And if another person is proud of themselves, and you might think that they have no reason to be proud of themselves, you need to accept their pride, accept the fact that they've got a strong ego, and maybe they're proud for a good reason, but you at least need to understand it. And it may be a situation where you're dealing with someone with a fragile ego, and if you're dealing with people with fragile egos, it's not your job to knock them down. It's your job to take into account the situation, and you have to deal with different people with different outlooks and different views. And so that might be another situation, Sagittarius, where you can use your sensitivity effectively. Capricorn, there's a fair amount of Earth in the sky at the moment. The moon is in Virgo, Mars is in Virgo, and we've got, of course, Venus in Taurus. And with this Earth, you are probably feeling okay. You understand what is happening. You're certainly not feeling at sea. You can feel the ground under your feet, and because you're feeling relatively confident, that means you can perhaps go further afield. Maybe in the recent past you've been too limited. You've just restricted yourself to what you knew and what you understood. But now you can take things further, and you can start to understand things that before you really hadn't wanted to understand. And so do consider the possibility that there is a new way of looking at things, just a new way of doing things. But don't rely too much on other people's analyses. For example, you might be told that one particular thing is true, and it might sound to you very convincing. But if anyone is too sure of themselves, then that is a sure sign that there is a problem. So it's really important that you do your own research, as they say. Make sure that it really makes sense. And as a Capricorn, I really think that is something that you can do. And continuing on the theme of relationships, it does appear that some people are not necessarily going in the right direction. They might be very sure of themselves. They might be able to give a good account of themselves, but in a way, the more certain someone is, then the more likely it is that they are on the verge of making a mistake. So it's perhaps important that you don't take people too seriously, and you question them at every stage. Even if someone has been completely trustworthy in the past and you regard them as being a safe pair of hands, that doesn't mean to say that they're a safe pair of hands right now. They just might have got something wrong. So that is something that you have to be aware of. And also, Capricorn, it's important that you're aware of your own power, and that is something I've been saying to you quite a lot, not just over the last few weeks, I think over the last few months, but at the moment, Capricorn, you do have the power to change things around you, and also your authority is really quite obvious. And so if you don't like the way things are moving, then they don't have to move in that way. But you don't want to be closed-minded. Part of what today is about exploration, but it's about your exploration. Yeah, other people can help, but it's not like taking maps off the shelf. You're looking at someone else's map, someone else's ideas. You've got to sort of do it yourself and work out exactly what your own path is. Aquarius, you would like things to be straightforward, but that's not necessarily the case. It just might be that things just become more and more complicated the more you get into them, and you try to understand something, and the more you try to understand something logically, the more complicated it becomes, and that might bother you. But maybe, Aquarius, it's just a time when you need to just understand that that is just the way it is, and you have to accept that there are certain people out there who are not as straightforward as you thought they were. And then there is a question of what do you do? Can you make things simpler? I mean, so what would you have to do to make things simpler? Now, it may be the case, Aquarius, that you have to use your feelings to make sense out of something. And at the moment, astrologically, we don't have any planets in air signs except for Pluto. And so with this elemental imbalance, you have to take what you have and realize that your emotions are maybe finer tuned than you'd realize. And it could be that if you have a feeling about something, then that feeling is actually telling you the truth of the matter. And it actually might be simplifying things. Now, feelings are always complicated, especially if you're an air sign. And there's always a danger with feelings that you misinterpret them or you misunderstand them. And you could just, I don't know, you might just believe what you want to believe. But there are different types of feelings, and there seems to be one overwhelming feeling that you don't like, but it's true. And that truth is emotionally evident. And, it could take many forms, and it might actually be about something quite material. So if you're trying to work out something of a financial nature, and it seems complicated, you're not sure what the truth of the matter is, you might just have this feeling about the way things are. It's a kind of feeling that you're not happy about, and you'd prefer it not to be the case, but your feelings are telling you this. And once you accept this feeling, then things are going to be obvious. And passing disappointment, yes, but once that disappointment is over, you will start to feel, real agency, that you are actually in control after all. And yes, Aquarius, once you know what's happening, you should be able to really assert yourself. You can assert yourself, and it doesn't require dramatic displays. It just means holding firm. And maybe Aquarius, that's all you have to do. And as far as relationships are concerned, well, the moon does make a sextile to the sun today, and that moon sextile sun, and the moon is making conjunction to Mars. Moon sextile sun means that relationships can work, but relationships are not going to be simple. You have to really appreciate other people's complexities, and the fact that other people have particular ways of doing things which are not entirely obvious, and they're not going to tell you how they want things done. You're going to have to kind of work it out for yourself. But Aquarius, I do think that is something you can do, and it may be just another case of just listening to your feelings. It doesn't feel natural listening to your feelings, but at the moment that might be the right thing to do. If you were to just focus on surface appearances, and just go for what is obvious, well, then that might be a mistake. What is materially obvious, but instead you need to go for what is emotionally obvious and what your feelings are really telling you. Pisces, inevitably there is going to be an emphasis on the other, on what other people are doing, what's happening in the outside world, what kind of pressures are on you from outside, and you have to sort of work out the best approach. It would be easy, Pisces, to just give in, to just accept that there are all of these outside pressures that you have to consider. It's best to keep your own thoughts to yourself, follow other people's suggestions. That might seem to be the best approach. I don't think it is the best approach. I think that at the moment, Pisces, you can find a path for yourself where your own needs are looked after, but where you also accept that you're not alone, that there are these pressures that you have to pay attention to. But paying attention to a set of pressures is not the same as giving into them. And a couple of people, they might really want a lot of attention. The moon is making a conjunction to Mars. Moon-Mars conjunction can be quite an angry aspect, and it's possible that some people are trying to claim, they know more than you do. They have access to the facts. You don't know what you're talking about, perhaps, but it's not true. You know what's going on. You can trust yourself, and if you trust yourself, then it's kind of easier to deal with other people, because if you know that you're right, and you know that you're not going to give ground, then you can start to operate, with confidence, and also with consideration. You do have to consider other people's particular personality traits, and also understand, what they're thinking and feeling. You get all that, and so you can be in, quite a good situation here when you can be part of a world, but at the same time not be controlled by the world. Now, one aspect we do have is a semi-sextile between Mercury and Jupiter. And this does give a similar message. So we have Jupiter, which is you. Jupiter in Cancer, in its exaltation, looking good. But Mercury in Leo is making this 30-degree aspect to Jupiter. And Mercury could come over as being an irritant. And that irritant might be another person expressing things that you're not especially interested in. But, they are very interested in it. They want your attention. And why do they want your attention? Maybe they've got something important to say. Maybe they're just into themselves. And so that is certainly a possibility. But just because someone is demanding your attention and is being apparently obnoxious, it doesn't mean to say that you have to ignore them or discount them. They do have something to say. They do have something to contribute, and that is the nature of the semi-sextile. The semi-sextile aspect is about two forces that somehow have to find an accommodation, and so perhaps with this Mercury semi-sextile Jupiter, you have to, accommodate other people and their needs, even if those needs are quite childish, just wanting attention. But you have to accommodate those needs and, also, hold firm. Though it is possible, Mercury in Leo is telling you something about yourself. And Mercury, you could say, is the anti-Pisces. Mercury rules Virgo, it rules your opposite sign, and Mercury in Leo is everything you are not. And you think about Leo and getting attention and regarding yourself as being important, and perhaps Pisces, you should actually be adopting some of those traits, which are so different from what you are. You're not a Leo, but maybe at the moment you should think about what it means to be a Leo. It's a very solar sign. The sun is in its own sign in Leo. It's all about the self. And so perhaps, Pisces, you've been forgetting about yourself recently, and you may be reminded by the behavior of another person that you are actually important. And so perhaps you should make some effort to recognize your own ego and to regard yourself as being important, as someone who really does need to be taken seriously. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And it's now time to look at the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Monday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 56, which is the Wanderer. And the Wanderer is a person who is on strange ground. They don't quite know where they are. They're traveling. And because they're traveling, they're away from home. They feel not entirely comfortable. And we can feel as wanderers, not just when we are in a foreign country or in a city we've never been to before. We can also get it when we're just doing something that is completely weird, just something we don't usually do. And, we don't know the rules, we don't know how to do it, we just feel completely at sea. So that might be how you feel, that you just are not familiar with things. You're looking for a home. That's one thing about the Wanderer. The Wanderer is always looking for a home. And that is the object of a wanderer's quest. So, whatever you're doing, you're looking for security. You want to be in a position where you can say, oh, I know what I'm doing. And so if you're involved in a task that is alien. Maybe it's a new piece of technology. You are the wanderer with reference to that piece of technology. You don't get it. You're maybe looking at lots of YouTube videos trying to make sense of it. You're looking at an instruction manual and it still doesn't make sense. So that might be the situation you're in. Or it could be that you're in a strange place. Could be you are in a foreign country, or you're in an environment that you don't really understand, and you don't understand the rules. And so the question is, what do you do when you're a wanderer? If you are a wanderer, then you do have to be careful, extra careful, and you mustn't take things for granted. And there are two lines moving, and the fourth line moves, the fifth line moves, the fourth line moves, and the fourth line is not particularly easy. It indicates that you are making progress, but the I Ching is still not happy with you making progress. Why isn't it happy? The reason it's not happy, it might be because you're complacent. You think you understand something. You think you're making progress, but you're still in alien territory. And so it's really important that you are not complacent. Additionally, you might be dissatisfied. You might be so confident that you are dissatisfied with something. You don't blame yourself. You blame other people. You blame this foreign place you're in when things don't work. And so dissatisfaction can also be a problem. But whatever it is, your attitude is wrong. And just because you've made a gain, you're making progress, doesn't mean that doesn't mean you're a local. Doesn't mean you're familiar. You're really familiar with the situation. And then the fifth line moves, and that is different. And the fifth line actually suggests that you do make real progress, not sort of fake progress. It's not about feeling good about something with no reason. And perhaps that comes from having humility at the last moment, realizing that you haven't got everything sorted out, and so you keep going. And in the end, there is recognition, there is perhaps acceptance, and you start to feel more comfortable. So keep working away, and do have a sense of humility. That really does matter. And so the wanderer can in the end start to feel more at home. It's still the wanderer, you haven't made it yet. And with these two lines moving, we move to a second hexagram, and that second hexagram is hexagram 53, which is development. It's really more of the same, and it's more progress. So you're still at sea, you still are on unfamiliar territory, but you are making progress. Again, it's not fast progress, but you are getting there. So if you start the day feeling that you don't really know what's going on, you're having to deal with things you don't understand, then just keep going, be humble, and in the end you get recognized, or you get some recognition, and you do start making real progress. And now I want to turn to the UK, and I want to start off by looking at the horoscope of the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Now, Keir Starmer's chart is a chart that I have looked at before on quite a few occasions. Now, the problem with Keir Starmer is that we do not have a time of birth. And remember, never trust a politician if you don't have their time of birth. It's just a golden rule. So if we look at Keir Starmer's chart, which I've taken for noon, and let's get some context on Keir Starmer. What's happening in the UK. If you haven't been following the UK, Keir Starmer is in a certain amount of trouble, and this trouble seems to take many different forms. And from a political point of view, he is not making it. He is not an effective prime minister. He seems to be indecisive. He's making a lot of U-turns. Although his government has a huge majority, he is he's increasingly perceived as being weak, and so he says he wants to reduce payments on reduce expenditure on benefits, on certain types of benefits, and his party, his backbenchers are opposed to it. They raise all these complaints, and so he makes U-turns. And so making U-turns in politics can be a dangerous thing to do. I mean, you could say that making U-turns shows that you're reasonable, but very often if you make one U-turn, it's perceived that you're going to make another U-turn, and you basically become a weak prime minister. And I think that is how he is perceived. Now, Keir Starmer, he's a Virgo, and I think that when he first got elected as leader, as leader, there was a view that he was a sensible, technocratic kind of person. Maybe he didn't have a load of charisma, and people made the contrast maybe with all the chaos in the Conservative Party. Boris Johnson, and Boris Johnson may have been a charismatic politician, but he was all over the place. He wasn't really a details person, and Keir Starmer was sensible, and he was sort of Captain Sensible, the person who was going to sort the country out. And a lot of people felt that. And in terms of the Labour Party, the previous leader of the Labour Party, Jeremy Corbyn, there was a perception that he was too left-wing, and there are all sorts of scandals in the Labour Party. And there was, for example, the anti-Semitism issue in the Labour Party, but that was really a major issue. And so Keir Starmer appeared to be a return to normality. And so although people weren't necessarily excited by Keir Starmer, they thought he was safe, and he got elected, and so things were going to get better. But as it happened, Keir Starmer is not up to the job, and there have been further issues of a sort of a darker nature. Things have gone on. This weird stuff has been going on, like a house he owned or used to own got set on fire, and or there was something to do with arson, and a car he used to own got set on fire, and some people have been charged with this crime. I think some of them are sort of Ukrainian, I think. I don't want to go into the details. I mean, you can look it up. But there's also this issue about his own psychological health, and that there's this view that there's something fundamentally a bit weird about Keir Starmer. And so when you have this, and it all sort of talk about his private life, and so this kind of contrasts with this view of him as being very sort of technocratic. And so there's something going on here that people are thinking, is this going to actually undermine his premiership? And it does seem that he's under psychological pressure. And so when you've got a prime minister, you're thinking that this guy knows what he's doing. You don't want to have someone who's a psychological wreck. I'm not saying he is a psychological wreck. I mean, if I'm a psychological wreck, well, you can put up with it. It's just my YouTube channel. But if I'm Prime Minister of the UK and I'm I might be a psychological wreck, or people think you might be a psychological wreck, well, that's a problem, because you're having to make important decisions. So as far as Keir Starmer's horoscope is concerned, here it is. Let's find his chart again. We do not have his time of birth. He's a Virgo, but he's got planets in Libra. He has got 3 planets in Libra. So he's got Mercury, Moon, Venus in Libra. So you could argue that Keir Starmer is more of a Libra than he is a Virgo. And we can certainly see his Virgo traits, but his Libran traits, we're really seeing them, in quite a big way. We think of Libra. We've talked about Libra and politicians. Libra and politicians should be, when they work very well, they are dynamic. You think of Margaret Thatcher, Putin, Berlusconi in Italy, Benjamin Netanyahu. Now these people are very divisive. Okay, I know Berlusconi is dead, but they are decisive. Of course, in the US, you have sort of AOC and what's his name, Zoran Mondani, who's just won the Democrat nomination. So Librans can be effective politicians, and the key to being an effective politician is you have your ideas and you want other people to follow your ideas. Other people have to balance with you. But what's happening with Keir Starmer increasingly is we're seeing the weak side of Libra. Maybe it's his moon in Libra. The weak side, which is just compromise. He's got problems with his backbenchers. If he was tough, he'd say, if you don't vote for me, there's going to be a general election, and you stick by that. I mean, I think there were suggestions he might do that, but he's just not being very decisive. And when you've got lots of U-turns, that's a sure sign that Libra is going wrong. And additionally, there is a complex side to his personality, and so much of Keir Starmer can be understood, I think, with reference to his sun in Virgo. Now, his sun in Virgo is conjunct Pluto. And you might say, oh, sun conjunct Pluto. Well, it's great for a politician because they're into power. And politicians are supposed to be powerful. That's one way you could see Pluto as working. But Pluto can work in many ways, and Pluto might be something dark, representing the underworld, and there may be a side to Keir Starmer's personality that we don't immediately see. Pluto, it's hidden, and how is Virgo operating? And we start to understand that Sun-Pluto conjunction when we look at the midpoints. So if we look at the 90-degree dial of Keir Starmer, which is here it is. So here's the 90-degree dial, and so what we're going to do is we're going to put the Sun and Pluto. There's his Sun-Pluto. There, I put the Sun-Pluto conjunction on the pointer. So he has Sun aspecting the Mars-Neptune midpoint. In fact, he's got the Sun on the Mars-Neptune midpoint. He's also got the Sun square the Mars-Hades midpoint. So when you see Mars-Neptune, well, when I see Mars-Neptune, my first feeling is, well, that's sleaze. That's one way of looking at it. Mars-Neptune can also be about misplaced energy. And when you throw in Mars-Hades, that indicates to me something weird and twisted about this man. And, just because you've got this midpoint, well, it doesn't mean to say it's always going to manifest. But given what we know is happening, there are all sorts of stories flooding YouTube and the internet about what Keir Starmer is doing, about his private life. And I don't know whether it's true or not. I've no idea. But what I do know is that he's got Sun on the Mars-Neptune and the Mars-Hades midpoint. And I'll just give you an idea of Sun on the Mars-Neptune midpoint. What Reinhold Ebertin says about Sun on the Mars-Neptune, just to give you an idea. This is Reinhold Ebertin in the combination of stellar influences. He says Sun on the Mars-Neptune, lack of willpower, discontent, a weak physique, weak or little vitality, the danger of infection, the undermining of the health, the dissolution of the body. Now that's one way of looking at it, but Ebertin also talks about the Mars-Neptune principle, the negative side of it, the conscious direction of the will without the ability to take action, self-destroying forces and agents, moodiness, irritability, discontent, feelings of inferiority. So, we do have that, and I don't think that is especially helpful. And then you throw in Sun on the Mars Hades midpoint, and that's just plain dark. What is he involved with? And I think that is a question we have, and I think it is an integral part of who Keir Starmer appears to be. And it's particularly an issue when you've got this weirdness, whatever it is, when you've got someone who tries to give the image of being very technocratic and straight and normal, and yet there's something being hidden. If someone came over as being unusual and having a strangeness to them, whatever that might be, and they had Sun on the Mars-Neptune midpoint, well, fair enough. If I told you that that I had Sun on my Mars-Neptune midpoint, which I don't, or Sun on my Mars-Hades midpoint, well, you could say, well, I'm an astrologer, you expect me to be weird, you expect me to have strange interests, that's what you expect. But when you've got an outward personality that seems to be very straight, but inside there's something very dark, then you've got all sorts of problems. And so that does perhaps cast a shadow on him as British Prime Minister. How did this man get to be British Prime Minister? So those are a few thoughts about his natal chart. Remember, this is a natal chart where we do not have a time of birth, but I do think that this point here, this Sun-Pluto conjunction, really does become important. And we can look at transits in this chart, and we know that next year Saturn will be opposition his Mercury, and the transits don't perhaps tell us a great deal, but it's the solar arc directions that I do find interesting. So Keir Starmer, he's going to be 63 next birthday. So if we look at Keir Starmer's solar arc directions, we do find something which I regard as being pretty interesting. So let's find his directions. Remember, this is moving every single planet. We're going to move every single planet 63 degrees. So this is what we'll do. So solar arc directions for today. There are his solar arc directions, and oops, there we are. And so if we look at what's actually happening, so his solar arc directed Mars is at 8 degrees 51 Virgo. So there is his natal Mars at 6 Cancer, and solar arc around 8:51. We don't know whether that's absolutely accurate, but it's because we don't have a time of birth. But so his solar arc directed Mars is starting to move onto his Sun. You see, at noon his Sun would have been at 9:30 Virgo. So solar arc directed Mars is starting to trigger his Sun-Pluto conjunction. So we know that his Sun-Pluto conjunction, both the Sun and his Pluto, are on his Mars-Neptune and his Mars-Hades midpoint. So this is a very, very difficult placement in his chart. It's talking about all of that stuff that he's hiding, and Mars is really starting to bring it out into the open. Sure, that Mars is not exact yet, but over the next few months, into next year, it's going to get closer and closer, and it's going to become more and more obvious, or it's going to become more and more of a problem for him. And there are other solar arc directions going on. Look at so if you take his Sun-Pluto conjunction, which I regard as in many respects as being the author of his misfortune, or at least part of his misfortune. And so this directed Sun-Pluto conjunction is moving onto his Neptune. So he's already had the sun has actually just gone over his Neptune. I mean, in fact, we can say that he's got Neptune exactly on his sun exactly on his Neptune at the moment. So what's happened is he's got a sort of wide Sun-Mars sextile in his chart, and Mars sextile is Pluto. So if we direct that sextile, we have this time now when he's got Mars on his Sun, we've got Sun on his Neptune. So it's all really, really coming together for Keir Starmer, and of course not in a particularly pleasant way. And from a more immediate perspective, remember he's got Sun-Pluto conjunction at 9-10 Virgo, and Mars is about to cross his Sun-Pluto conjunction. He's about to have transiting Mars conjunct his solar arc directed Mars, and transiting Mars right on his Sun, right on his Pluto, and that's going to be happening over the next week, because what Mars is now at, whereas Mars about sort of 7 degrees Virgo, so it's just got a couple of degrees to go. So as we move into July, then I think Mars is going to cause a lot of problems for Keir Starmer. And we might not know about these problems immediately, but just remember that Keir Starmer is under a huge amount of psychological pressure, I think, and it is really coming into the open, and it's really not going to get any better, I don't think. And this is a good reason probably why Keir Starmer needs to stand down sooner rather than later, because it absolutely isn't going to get any better. Now, there are some other charts we can look at relating to Keir Starmer. There is a chart when he became leader of the Labour Party. So he became leader of the Labour Party. Now that's actually the chart of the Labour Party. Sorry, I didn't want to look at that. I'm not going to actually look at the Labour Party chart. But the chart when he became leader of the Labour Party, April the 4th, 2020. Remember, this is not the chart when he became Prime Minister. This is a chart but when he became leader of the party. And you could say that it was successful because they chose a leader who eventually became Prime Minister. And the chart itself is, it's not great. It's got a Mars-Saturn conjunction. Having a Mars-Saturn conjunction does sort of indicate the difficulties that Starmer's leadership is going to face. I mean, he nearly resigned as leader when he lost a by-election, I think the following year. There was a disastrous by-election, which the Conservatives won, and that put a lot of pressure on his leadership, but he stayed there, he stayed with it, and of course, he eventually became Prime Minister, and because he won the July the 5th election last year, July the 4th election last year with a massive majority. But still, there is that Mars-Saturn conjunction is not going to go away, and the moon is void of course, and it might have been tempting to say, well, moon is void of course, he wasn't ever going to become Prime Minister. Now, this is an example of a chart where you see the moon is void, but still it did work out. The Labour Party chose a leader who eventually beat the Tories. Of course, anyone would have probably beaten the Tories, but still, his leadership has a slight void of course feel to it, because it does, as I think a phrase, a word that's been used for Starmer has been rudderless. What is it? What is the meaning of this government? Where is the Labour Party taking Britain? And that is the question. And to get some confirmation about this leadership chart, it's good to compare it with the election. With the election when Starmer became leader. Sorry, when Starmer became Prime Minister. So the inner wheel represents the chart for when he became leader. The outer wheel is for the chart for when he became Prime Minister. I believe I got this right. He became leader at 10:45 a.m. on April the 4th, 2020. I'm not quite sure what my source was, but assuming it was 10:45, that would give 10 put 10 Cancer on the ascendant. And so there was a new moon just after he became Prime Minister, and so this new moon was right on the ascendant of the chart for when he became leader. So that seems to fit. So that does seem to work. And interestingly, transiting Saturn when he became Prime Minister was at 1924 Pisces, which was on the Mercury of when he became leader in 2020. And so that possibly wasn't a very good omen. I mean, so Saturn hitting his Mercury, it's great. He's a leader. He's Prime Minister. Yet now we have to deal with the consequences, and it's quite a depressive thing having Saturn transiting Mercury. One other thing. Saturn at 0 degrees Aquarius when Starmer became leader. There was a Jupiter-Saturn conjunction later in the year at 0 degrees Aquarius, and so perhaps Starmer's leadership is very much connected with that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees Aquarius, which was right on the. Just a reminder of that conjunction. That conjunction had. Jupiter-Saturn conjunction right on the descendant, and perhaps one associates that conjunction. This is a conjunction set for Westminster with the decline of Britain. Kind of a long-term decline of Britain, and so Starmer is all part of that. And of course, he has Saturn in Aquarius in his natal chart anyway. Now, when we think about what is happening now, and right now, and going back to his leadership chart, and I've looked at the chart for when he became Prime Minister. Just very quickly, his chart for when he became Prime Minister had 1 degree Aries, on a descendant. And of course, I've looked at this chart a lot, and I've said, Saturn and Neptune are on a descendant for the moment when he became Prime Minister. So that really is undermining it, and the government's enemies, his enemies, perhaps the fact that the Starmer regime is kind of under pressure, before it's even started. And then you think about the leadership. Now that's how it works in Britain. In Britain, we don't have obviously we don't have a presidential system, but people do not directly vote for the Prime Minister. They vote for members of Parliament, and the members of Parliament, in the end, create the Prime Minister. So if the Labour Party wanted to choose a different leader, then they would. So if Starmer was forced out, then the Labour Party would choose someone else to replace him. And going back to the Starmer leadership chart, Venus is at 0 degrees 37 Gemini. And so that means that Uranus is about to make a conjunction to Venus. So at the moment Uranus changes sign, it moves into Gemini, Venus gets activated. And I'm just wondering, what does Venus mean? And you might say Venus in the 12th house. Venus represents a person waiting in the wings. It could represent a woman waiting in the wings, and that might represent the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. So Angela Rayner, she doesn't actually have any air in her chart, but she's someone we do need to think about. And so here is Angela Rayner's horoscope, the Deputy Prime Minister. Again, don't have a time of birth. You can't trust her because we don't have a time of birth. And so she is an Aries, March 28th, 1980, with pretty much no air in her chart, but she's got a lot of fire. Well, she's got Sun and Mars in fire signs, and I think we can really see that in the terms of the way she presents herself. Now, I'm not in the UK, but my understanding is that her position in the Labour Party had been under pressure for some time. She's got Mars. She's got a Mars-Uranus square, and I think as Uranus was hitting her Mars, there were questions about how was the party trying to force her out because she was she didn't like the way some of the stuff that Starmer was doing. I don't think she is very much on the left of the party, but it does seem that she has now established her authority and has established herself as, or is increasingly establishing herself as an alternative candidate. So yeah, I think she could be the Venus in Gemini represented in a leadership chart that is about to be activated by Uranus. And, she's being an Aries. Aries politicians actually do quite well in the UK. In England, people like Aries. Aries can function very well, and people. So we shouldn't assume just because she's on the left and that just the moment she becomes Prime Minister she'll be a disaster. You can't tell. You can't really tell how people are going to perform as prime ministers until they actually become prime ministers. So we shouldn't necessarily, prejudge that. Now, what is perhaps important about Angela Rayner's chart is the directions, and just a reminder that she's a very fixed person. There's her Venus in Taurus, opposition Uranus, with Mars on the T. You've got North Node on the T, and so it's all starting to happen. Perhaps. Well, we've already had Uranus rolling over her T square, and then there are her directions. So that directions is, so she is she's around 45 years old. So these, when you move all the planets 45 degrees. So it's the sun that I find interesting. So she's got her sun at 2755, and so her sun is starting to move towards the 45 degree aspect to the sun itself. But you can see her progressed sun, her solar arc directed sun, is starting to move onto her Venus, and that will perhaps activate in about a year's time. And then her solar arc directed sun in about 3 years' time will be on her Mars, and also in 3 years' time that will be on her Uranus. So it seems that from a solar arc perspective, then over the next 3 years, things are going to be very, very dramatic for her because of the sun. So, what does that actually mean? Well, the first direction she gets is Sun conjunct Venus. So she's got Venus in Taurus. Venus is in its own sign in Taurus. And so with the Sun conjunct Venus, you'd think that might actually be a fortunate event. For example, her becoming Prime Minister. I mean, it might say something about her personal life. It doesn't mean to say it's going to say anything about her public life. But given that she has an increasingly high profile, I think it's a good chance that it is about her public life. And so you could say that the Sun makes a conjunction to Venus. That could be her eventually becoming Prime Minister, maybe sooner rather than later. And then she has to deal with Sun square Mars, Sun opposition Uranus, and then that would be the whole thing falling apart. So that might be a way of looking at it. Now, I'm only looking at one thing here. You can't tell that Angela Rayner is going to be Prime Minister just on the basis of a progressed Sun, and it's really difficult when you've got a chart with no time of birth. But I mean, I'm kind of speculating and trying to just look at one thing. Now, there are other people who could be Prime Minister. I mean, the other candidate is a man called Wes Streeting. I remember listening to him on the radio about 4 years ago, and I just listened to him and I thought, oh, well, maybe he sounds like a prime ministerial material. I mean, he probably in terms of electability, he would be a better bet in the end than Angela Rayner. And here is his chart. I don't want to say much about it. Again, another chart without a time of birth. He does have the Sun at 0 degrees Aquarius, the Sun in the same place as Jupiter and Saturn, the same place as the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in 2020. I've heard speculation about a man called Andy Burnham, who I think is mayor of Manchester. But trouble about Andy Burnham, even before you look at the astrology, he's not a member of Parliament, and then so in order to be a member of Parliament, he'd have to stand in a by-election. And at the moment, Labour are not winning are unlikely to win any by-election. So probably Andy Burnham is not going to be Prime Minister in this Parliament because, not least because he's not in the House of Commons. So that's Wes Streeting. I don't really want to say any more about him. And of course, the Labour Party with Angela Rayner, they have not had a female. They've not had a female prime minister. They've not had, the Conservatives have had quite a few. They've had, of course, Kemi Badenoch. They've got a woman in charge. The Conservatives likewise have had Rishi Sunak. So the Conservatives had a prime minister of Indian origin, but all of the Labour past leaders have all been white males, and so there's probably going to be a huge amount of pressure if Starmer were to stand down for them to choose a woman. So that's probably a reason why Angela Rayner is probably going to be the next Prime Minister, assuming that something goes wrong with Keir Starmer. And I do think that there's a high chance of that. I don't think things are going to get any better for him. So those are a few thoughts about British politics. I hope you found that of some interest. I mean, if you're not interested in the UK, well, it's the astrology that counts. I'm just trying to show you how one might be able to use astrology, even in situations where you don't have the time of birth. So thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. And I will talk to you again tomorrow.